Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Is your computer working okay?
Yeah, it seems to be okay. We'll see if I disappear all of
Yeah.
a sudden.
Hi, Al.
Hi, Zach. Hi. Martin, I think I saw, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. We have Roman yet?
Not yet.
It looks like we ended up getting 3 out of 5, unfortunately. By the way, Zach, what in the hell is CLE, which is another abbreviation? I have no idea. When Glenis said, "Oh, I have a CLE scheduled." What's CLE?
I would believe it's a specific like continuing education credit for lawyers.
Oh,
I don't know what
okay.
the particular acronym stands for, but I'm assuming law or legal is part of with the CE, like continuing law,
Yeah.
education, or
Okay.
credit.
Yeah, I like to, people use these acronyms and they assume everybody knows what they are. It's just kind of not very wise.
Always good to spell it out.
Yeah. We just got a response on,
I wanted
chat
to,
telling you what it is. Continuing legal education.
okay. I wanted to ask you, Zach,
Yep.
in reference to the proposed zoning text amendment, who's are the council people presenting that?
Yes,
And
they're
then
they're the applicant and the representing agent, functionally.
Okay, so we'll give them 10 minutes.
Yep.
And who is speaking on the other side for the planning department? Is Brad going to chime in there, or are we just going to look at this list of notes and comments? What's the protocol there?
So I'll be walking through the staff comments for the zoning text amendment.
Okay.
So it'll kind of be like how we treat any other application for the discussion. I mean, obviously, Brad and Amy were pretty well involved with the discussions with the common council members who were involved with this zoning text amendment. So Amy will be able to fill in any gaps for something that I've missed with the application.
Okay. Are you speaking first?
No.
Or after the presenters, or should we ask for public comment and then you present?
I would say, we can have the council members present, and then if there's any questions that, the board has, I would say feel free to ask those so the applicant can directly respond to those. And then we can take any public comment, and then I can go through the staff recommendation.
Okay.
If that works for everyone on the board. And it looks like we have 4 members. Looks like Chris is here as well as
Yeah,
well.
Chris is here for a brief time. I would wish that Chris would be able to be here for the proposal for the Stewarts, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it might be good just at the end for us to discuss maybe how we want the discussion to go. At the meeting, if we're not able to get both Chris and Glenis there for that discussion, just kind of walk through how we want the presentation and discussion to go.
Yeah, but is Chris Spencer presenting anything at this meeting concerning that?
He'll be here. I mean, I think he'll be able, again, kind of like with Amy being able to fill in the gaps with the zoning text amendment. Chris will be able to, fill in anything that I am not able to cover. Primarily the discussion for the proposed Stewart's conditional use permit. I'm going to be focusing on the contents of the memo and just going over what's changed since the last conditional use permit application.
Okay.
Al, did you have any other questions
Well, I
before
guess-
the meeting got started?
I don't.
Okay. I did want to just
I'll
add a
just
quick,
go through.
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to recommend just a quick touching base just on training credits for the year, just at the end of the meeting. I think the majority of you are either have the credits or are pretty close to getting the credits, but just wanted to put that out there as a reminder. And maybe just talking about the CDRPC local government webinar series that they're doing as an opportunity to get some credits. So it won't take too long, but I just
Okay.
wanted to.
Yeah, those have been very, very good and very concise.
Good.
Enjoyed watching a couple of them.
Okay, I'm going to, then I'll open the meeting and then do the welcome and then turn it over to you for the typical, how the people speak and timing and all that.
Yep.
So it's 6:03 and we got everybody who was going to be here is here. So let me know when you're ready.
I'm all set.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the combination meeting of the Albany City Planning Board. This is both a board public hearing and workshop combination. This was done to accommodate a rather full agenda that we have, not only this particular period of time, but also later in October. So as best we could, we've tried to fit in as much as we can in October in advance and in anticipation of additional projects that will be coming at us later in October and into November. We have 4 of our 5 planning board members available, and later we will have 3 of 5 as Chris Ellis has to jump off for a critically already scheduled meeting. We welcome people who are listening in to make comments if you would like. Your comments are limited to 3 minutes for the public to comment. And after the 3 minutes are up, we will ask for someone else to comment if there are comments. If you do have any, you please sign up with our staff member, Zach Powell. He will explain how to do that on Zoom. And the planning board listens to the comments of the applicants first, asks questions of the applicants, and after that, we open it up for public comment. And then after that, the planning staff gives its professional recommendations. With that, Zach, can you please explain how the comment period works?
Yeah, thanks, Al. So members of the public will get 3 minutes to speak, and you can sign up to do that via the chat feature in Zoom. Please try to do that as soon as possible for the project or projects that you want to speak on. Please make sure to include your name and address when you request to sign up to speak. We'll be putting up a visual timer on the screen. When it hits 30 seconds, there'll be an audible beep and the color of the screen will change as well. And then when your time is expired, there'll be 3 beeps as well. And if you have any questions about signing up, feel free to send a chat and we'll try to respond to that as soon as possible. I think that's about it.
Okay, we will begin. The first item on the public hearing is zoning text amendment number 0015. And this is a text amendment proposed by the applicant's council members, Thomas Hoey and Michael O'Brien. And it's an amendment to the text of various parts of the Unified Sustainable Development Ordinance to create certain requirements for conditions placed on the planning board approvals and for planning board and planning staff waivers. Okay.
Give me just one moment. I'm just gonna elevate the applicants to panelists so they can speak. And Councilmember Hoey and O'Brien, you should be able to unmute yourselves now.
Hello, everybody. Councilmember O'Brien is currently on a finance committee meeting. I just jumped off. But if he's he's here.
Yeah, I'm sitting in. I muted the finance committee meeting.
Okay. So basically, we had talked about this, going back, I think in July, this first came up. As you know, the mayor vetoed it. We were thinking about overriding the veto, but we met with David Gallen, Chris Spencer, Brad Glass, Amy Levine, Rich Conti, Kelly Kimbrough, Jenny Farrell, and we hammered out what we want to say, change the wording to make it agreeable for especially for Chris Spencer and Brad Glass. We didn't think we'd have to come back in front of the planning board, so but we're here. There was some discussion on that, and it's also going to go to the county board. But anyhow, this committee that was kind of an ad hoc type of committee approved it. We feel that this is good language, that it's good changes for the USDO, and it makes everybody, feel comfortable. So with that, I'll just I'll be open to questions and anything like that.
Yeah, and if I could just add,
thank you very much.
Hello. If I could just add, because I sat in on that working group, and actually the impression of the working group from Dave Gallen was that we didn't have to go back to the planning board, but if it's felt that we have to, we're back here, because the language in this new statute was a collective work that Chris, Brad, Amy, David Levine, and our council leadership participated in. And it was definitely a good faith effort on everybody's part to come to an agreement where we could on kind of setting some reasonable expectation on the use of waivers, such that they had to be stated, they had to be justified. And so here we are, but at the same time, this ordinance was introduced with the full expectation that it was a collaborative agreement between the planning director, the mayor's office, and the council. So that's, in summary, what Tom said also.
Okay, it's great that everybody got together and was able to come up with a proposal that seems to make sense. Zach, are there any people from the public who would like to comment on this?
No public speakers signed up.
Okay, then would you want to give the planning department some look at tech notes and comments on this?
Yeah, I can go through this real fast. Let me, I'll just progress through just because I had put in slides for the applicants. So just really to reiterate what the council members have stated, the goal of this amendment is to create review criteria for planning board waivers that are functionally the same as an area variance review criteria. It also adds the Uniform Fire Code as a review criterion for building permits. It also places restrictions on development plan review and demolition review approval condition language. So just as a reminder, this is what the area variance standards are. Basically, the language has been replaced with waiver and planning board as relevant. When we get into the public workshop agenda tonight, we're going to be looking at an application for 176 Sheridan Avenue, and that applicant has requested a waiver. So they have submitted a waiver request in the form of the area variance form. So we're going to be reviewing it, in line with what the council members are proposing tonight. So the first aspect is creating review criteria for waivers, which this aligns with the waiver section for major subdivisions already. So it's providing alignment with existing portions of the code, which makes sense. And it also provides a guide and a rational basis for any waivers that are granted by the planning board, which is just good practice moving forward with any decisions and waivers. The second aim, just as I mentioned, is adding the Uniform Fire Code as a review criterion for building permits, which is good just to reiterate this, just to make sure that it's as clear as possible within the USDO. And then the third aim is to make sure that when there are conditions for development plan review and demolition review approvals, that they're clearly defined to state when a certain condition needs to be met, whether it's before demolition, whether it's before obtaining a certain type of permit, before getting a certificate of occupancy, which is good practice just to make sure that expectations are as clear as possible for the applicants, so that members of the public better understand what the applicant needs to do. So it's just clarifying things, which is in good governance. The second part is making sure that the conditions align with any city and other governmental standards. There's a portion for the text amendment that states, whenever city staff is alerted that there's a conflict, that conflict needs to be addressed. If there is a conflict with a stated condition in a development plan review or a demolition review approval. And finally, it's also specifying the appeals process. If there's a condition placed on a demolition review approval or major development plan review approval that maybe cannot be met to the exact word or to the fullest intent, it allows for opportunities for the applicant to go back for the planning board to either modify it or for the chief planning official to determine that a substitution can be made to meet the intent of that condition. But if there is an aggrieved party who doesn't believe that the substitution made by the chief planning official is sufficient, they can appeal that decision to the Board of Zoning Appeals through an administrative appeal. So it's really just outlining these processes, making them clearer, and making all these processes more accessible to everyone who interacts with the USDO or who is interested in these types of projects. And the application was referred by the Common Council to the Albany County Planning Board today for their meeting, and the County Planning Board modified the local approval just to say that the Common Council, to recommend that the Common Council should send notice of the zoning text amendment to all neighboring municipalities if it's approved. So really based on all of this, the staff recommendation would be to give a favorable recommendation for the zoning text amendment. And again, I think all of us in the planning department appreciate the time that's been spent working to come to consensus on the proposed amendment, and we appreciate the time and input from everyone involved.
Any questions from the board? I have can you give us an example, Zach, of point number 3? That is, specify the appeals process for decisions made by the chief planning official, et cetera. What would be an example of that, isn't it?
Yeah, so maybe let's say that a condition of approval was that the applicant had to install a particular type of landscaping. Maybe it was, in the condition it said the applicant had to install a shade tree. But come to find out, a shade tree doesn't make sense in that location because maybe that would create a conflict with existing utilities or something like that. So in that situation, the chief planning official could determine that this is significant enough that this application needs to come back to the planning board to modify that condition of approval. Or the chief planning official could say, maybe instead of a tree, the applicant can use this other type of landscaping device to meet the intent of what the planning board had put as a condition for the approval. So if someone maybe disagrees with or wants to file an appeal against what the chief planning official has determined as an appropriate substitution, they can appeal that to the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Okay.
So now can I speak up?
Our council, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted
Somebody
to
else
point
had a
out,
question?
yeah, it's Chris Spencer. I just wanted to point out that part of the reason for that is we wanted to make sure that that the appeal was to the chief planning official and not somebody appealing a planning board decision to the BZA. So that's already outlined in the code. And so that was the best way to organize it, was to say that if somebody's appealing it, they're really appealing the chief planning official's decision not to send it back to the planning board, and then that would go to the BZA.
Okay. Our corporation counsel, Amy Levine, is present, and I just wanted to ask, Amy, do you have any comments on this or anything that you need to enlighten us about?
No, I think that, as has been stated, we had a lot of discussions about this. We spent a lot of time looking at the best ways to to achieve the aims of the ordinance and make sure that, it's doing it in the way to provide the most transparency and, public participation in the process as possible. I think it's a good piece of.
Okay, thank you. Planning board members, do you have any other any questions to the staff?
No.
Okay. And I'll call for a vote. The proposal is a favorable recommendation by the staff, and I would call for a vote for first, I'm losing my words here. I'm sorry.
Take your time.
Yeah, I need somebody to put a motion for favorable to pass this recommendation on to the Common Council.
Okay, so moved.
Okay, is there a second? Thank you, Chris. Further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, passed unanimously. Thanks
you.
again for the hard work on this and the ability to come to consensus. It's great.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is a proposal for the conditional permit review for the conversion of a one-family townhouse to a two-family townhouse at 292 State Street. And the applicant is Stephanie Brown. Is the applicant present to present?
She is. I'm just promoting her to a panelist, so bear with me just one sec. All right, Ms. Brown, you've been elevated to a panelist, so you should be able to unmute and turn on your camera.
Yes, I am here and I am unmuted.
Okay, so you're going to get 10 minutes, but feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, and Zach, will you be turning the pages for me, or do I have control of the PowerPoint?
I will be progressing the PowerPoint, so whenever you need me to move to the next slide, you can just say next slide.
Okay, well, let's go to the next slide, project purpose. As many of you know, my block of State Street is largely multifamily, and I am asking to be able to join this status by converting the underused ground floor of my building, which I've owned since 2001, into an apartment that will generate income for me. I make the argument that this is a form of aging in place. It will enable me to retain the building and provide some financial security. I expect that this unit will serve a very strong downtown rental market, especially tenants who want to walk to work at the legislature or state office buildings, or to the many graduate schools in my area. And as I mentioned before, the block is largely multifamily. Zach, if you could show the next page. You can see the context here. My building's known as the Little Red House between the hulking brownstones near the corner of Dove. Both of them were converted to multifamily some time ago. My ground floor project will make no change in my building's exterior. Next slide. The ground floor, as you can see, the two windows under the porch there, part of the ground floor height is hidden by the porch floor. It's more than 50% above grade, and it already has its own entrance. And on the back, it's a fully walkout above grade. And then the final slide is the two floor plans. An overview and then more detail. The 750 square feet of apartment meets the usage greater than 80% of the footplate. And there's still a provision for emergency exit from the major unit on the floors above. So if you have any questions, please ask.
Board members? Any questions? I just have two small ones. The ability for me to see on the screen here, where is the secondary exit in case of an emergency other than the front door? It's hard to see on the drawings here.
Oh, okay. It's down there at the bottom. That's the south side of the building.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, I see the arrow going around it. The other question I have is in the elevation, one of the elevations you showed the front of the property. Yeah, right there. It looks like there are bars on these windows. I'm assuming those are openable, or because there's a secondary egress, we don't need to have them openable? Maybe Zach, you can enlighten us about that, or maybe you can, I'm sorry.
They were there when I purchased the building. The previous owner had his home office down there. He was an executive at New York Telephone. There's egress both from the front, as you can see, and out the back.
Right. So those don't have to be operable, I guess. Is that right?
Al, this is Zach. That's my understanding, since there's a door. that enables, you know, the person that would be living down there to use that. So I think it's only in situations when it's a basement and there is no direct access out
Right.
via a door where the windows need to be operable.
Okay, thanks.
Is this
Other questions?
this floor been an apartment in the past, or will this be the first conversion to a residential apartment?
I think this building has had so many uses since 1845. It's been a little bit of everything from a chiropractor's office to multifamily. It was the subject of a major remodeling, as they used to call it, in 1959 that the Times Union did a feature story on.
Very interesting.
And the family of the New York Telephone executive couple converted the whole thing to one family. It's currently one of the few one family structures on the block. So I believe it's been multifamily before, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, not in the recent past. Okay.
I'd have to look at census records to establish that for sure.
Right.
Yeah, Martin, normally if a building has been multifamily in the past, then it is permitted to be. Going forward, we were just not able to find evidence through the Polk directories of it being a two-family in the past. So that's why it's going through this process now. But normally if a building has, you know, had more units in the past that were legally established, then it's permitted to do so again.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the board? Zach, do we have anybody to speak on this?
No speakers.
Okay. The planning staff has presented the board in the staff memo with a series of answers to conditional use conditions that are required to be met. I'm sure by now the board has read them, so I'm not going to burden the staff with having to repeat them all, unless there's anything you want to highlight, Zach.
Just some quick things. This was on the county planning board's agenda for today as well. It was deferred to local consideration without any modification. This is a type 2 action under seeker since it's a conversion of an existing structure. But yeah, there's nothing, I mean, if the board has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but there's nothing else significant to mention.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the conversion.
Move to approve the conversion.
And
Thank
seconded?
Seconded by Martin Hall. Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, thank you. It passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn the public meeting and go to our workshop session. Do I have a
move to
motion to
adjourn.
adjourn the meeting? Thank you. Second? Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. We are now into our workshop session. The workshop was moved from 2 days ago on Tuesday, which is our regular schedule, to today. And the first item on the public workshop agenda is 176 Sheridan Avenue, which is a proposal by the Interfaith Partnership for the Homeless to create an office from a residence. This project we saw and approved a while ago, but because of an odd twist of fate, which Zach can explain, we have to review it again.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Just to give a little bit more context, when the board saw this last, the project address was 180 Sheridan Avenue. The applicant has consolidated 176 and 180 Sheridan Avenue to become 176 Sheridan Avenue. So that's why there's the change in address. And in our zoning code, when there's any conversion of a residential structure to a commercial use, that goes through major development plan review. So that's why the application is back here tonight. So just as a refresher, this is the exterior of Interfaith Partnership for the Homeless. This is the former townhouse structure that they're looking to convert into offices. And here's the proposed ground floor plan. They're not proposing any exterior modifications. This is all interior. So they would be basically adding a connection between the former 180 Sheridan Avenue here with 176 Sheridan Avenue just on the first floor here. There's no proposed connection on the second floor. So since this is going through a redevelopment project, it did trigger a particular requirement for the applicant to install 1 street tree per 35 feet of lineal frontage. And that's because when a principal structure is renovated or redeveloped, and the proposed renovation or redevelopment is more than 25% of the actual value of the property based on city assessment records, they're required to meet that landscaping standard. And in the development plan review application the applicant submitted, the proposed cost of the project will be $215,495, which is 51.5% of the assessed value of the property, which is $418,000. So since the applicant was made aware of this requirement, they are seeking a waiver from the standard to not install those 5 trees. And they did submit a waiver request using an area variance form. And as I mentioned before, this is in keeping with the proposed zoning text amendment that just got a favorable recommendation from Councilmember Hoey and O'Brien. Again, just as a refresher, the waiver request review standards are functionally the same as an area variance, just with replacing the term variance with waiver and Board of Zoning Appeals with Planning Board. So I'm going to quickly walk through the waiver request, the applicant's answers, and then staff comments related to each of the review standards. So for the first standard, the planning board will be looking at whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the waiver. The applicant has stated that there's an accessible parking spot and fire hydrant in front of the proposed office and a curb cut for emergency vehicles takes up most of the frontage along 176 Sheridan Avenue. The absence of trees in this portion of the block is necessary according to the applicant for pragmatic reasons that the proposed alteration would not be out of place given that other portions of the block do not have trees currently. So I'm going to provide a visual context for this as well, but just to run through it quickly, approximately 89 feet of the frontage is used for an emergency loading area or restricted parking due to the location of a fire hydrant. And fire hydrants are required to have at least 3 feet of separation from any landscaping based under section 375-4F3D 1 of the USDO. Approximately 25 feet of the frontage is used for a curb cut to the on-site parking lot. Approximately 16 feet of the frontage is used for an ADA designated on-street parking area. So this leaves about 36 feet for the applicant to be able to plant 5 required trees. And based on how the code's drafted, the chief planning official or the forester can't modify the number of trees that are required to be installed. They can just modify the location. So the applicant would still be required to plant 5 shade trees within 36 feet, which there really wouldn't be space for it. It doesn't really make sense just because, again, by not planting the trees, it would not really be changing the streetscape as is. And it's not the only section of the streetscape that would be without trees. So it's not really creating a noticeable gap within the streetscape. And here's just a visual representation of that. This is the 32 feet that are available and free for a tree planting. And this is the 4 feet that are available for a tree planting as well. I should mention that there are overhead utilities as well. So this would have to be a smaller shade tree as well. So really any positive benefits of shade would be kind of minimal based on the required height given those overhead utilities. The second standard is whether the benefit sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than a waiver. So the benefit is providing easy access for emergency vehicles and people with disabilities arriving in cars and livery services, as well as deliveries that they receive along Sheridan Avenue. The applicant also states that the trees will impede security cameras that are essential to site security, as the shelter operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And this is currently why there are no trees along the frontage, as they state, for a very real and pragmatic reason. So really, since the property only has one frontage and only 36 feet of available frontage, there's really no feasible method for them to comply with the tree planting requirement. While there, when you do look on the map, it does say that there is a street behind there. It is not a right-of-way, it is a park. So they only have one frontage to work with and very limited space for 5 proposed trees. And based on the USDO planting requirements, trees are supposed to be spaced every 35 feet. So really, it would be contradicting another USDO standard by requiring them to plant 5 trees. The third standard is whether the request is substantial. The applicant states that the project involves reuse of a vacant residence as additional office space, and that the applicant is in dire need of this space. Omitting street trees will allow better access for people with disabilities, donations that will be dropped off, and unobstructed views for security cameras. They state that it's not a substantial request because it's a small project, just reusing an old townhouse for some offices. So for staff interpretation, while the applicant is proposing not to install any street trees when 5 are required, the lack of available frontage would limit the feasible number of trees to 1. And since the applicant has stated that the assessed value of the property that triggered this requirement is incorrect, and conversions of a similar scale would not be required to install street trees, the proposed waiver is not substantial. The applicant in their development plan review form stated that they've made improvements over $2 million to the property over the past 10 years. The property hasn't been reassessed, but since it is a nonprofit, it doesn't really make that much sense for the applicant to get reassessed, when the taxes are 0. So I think that's kind of what has led to the situation. The fourth review standard is whether the proposed waiver would have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district. The applicant states that there's no impact because there are currently no trees and the sidewalk goes right up to the curb. For staff interpretation, while the planting of street trees generally improves the quality of life and environmental conditions in the neighborhood, the proposed waiver would not change the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood. And it also prevents potential conflicts or tree damage related to emergency vehicular access. Normally, this is not something that we'd be advocating for, but again, since there is a high frequency of emergency vehicles that appear at the site, as well as deliveries. It doesn't really make sense to put potential trees in harm's way. And the fifth review criteria is whether the difficulty was self-created, which again is relevant to the board, but it doesn't preclude the applicant from receiving the waiver. The applicant states that the need for the waiver is not self-created, as there are not currently street trees in front of both buildings, and that most of the work is intended to be interior. They go on to state that while the properties values are low in the neighborhood and the city tax rolls claim that the combined properties are worth $418,000, they believe their worth is to the organization in the city are tenfold, and believe that it is unfair. They go on to state that the building at 176 Sheridan has received improvements in excess of $2 million. That included geothermal heating, as well as the creation of a homeless shelter and offices. So staff interpretation, again, the difficulty can be self-created and the applicant can still receive the waiver. Staff interpretation that the difficulty is partially self-created. There is a significant portion of the frontage that's dedicated to emergency vehicle access, a driveway, and an ADA designated on-street parking space, which would restrict the planting of 4 of the 5 required street trees, and is not self-created. The applicant could plant 1 street tree in front of the on-site parking lot. However, this would have a minimal positive or negative impact on the character of the neighborhood or the environment. And really is not a substantial waiver request, given that projects of a similar scale are not required to install street trees as well. I guess I'll open it to the board if they have any questions at this time. The application is still being reviewed by city departments, and the applicant's still responding to some comments made by the fire department. We're still waiting on comments from the water department and the Division of Traffic Engineering, but we're anticipating that we'll receive those comments prior to the meeting on the 27th.
Okay, this to me appears very cut and dried, but it's a good primer on the reason for waivers. Unfortunately, you know, we cannot pass it at this meeting because it's a workshop meeting. They do have to wait until the 27th and wait until the review comes in from the other departments.
What is the what are the rules or regulations, the requirements for planting trees on streets that have overhead utilities? I'm just thinking that if we can't plant trees on streets with overhead utilities, we're never going to have another tree in the city of Albany. So there seems to be some way around that.
Right. So the USDO does, state if there are overhead utilities that, smaller trees or dwarf trees can be planted instead. And the Department of General Services and the Office of the Forester do have a guide on which types of trees can be planted under overhead utilities and still be compliant with their standards. Again, just since it's going to be smaller trees that would be able to be planted there, and there's a limit on them being able to plant 5 trees within the space of 36 feet when it's normally 1 per 35 feet. It's somewhat impractical given the circumstances.
Right. I mean, I think the benefits of street trees are enormous, especially in a city like Albany,
Yes.
in a neighborhood like this where there's a lot of walking and a lot of ability of the hardscape to absorb heat. It's just, I walk around, myself in the summer, and I see what the difference is in the comfort level where there's trees and where there aren't trees. So I don't want us to lose the fact that trees have a very substantial practical benefit for the operation of the city. And I don't want to set, a precedent that makes it too easy to avoid that. But yeah, I do see that. I do see some of the issues here.
No, and I mean, I totally agree with that. And, our department's been working to really make sure we're reviewing the landscaping requirements as much as possible to make sure that, applicants are complying with that. Because street trees are really important. The mayor has released her initiative to be planting more street trees, by 2025 as well. So normally this is, not really what we would be advocating for, but this is a somewhat unique situation where they are limited on space and the ability to do, an alternative form of landscaping that would really make an impact. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Zach, just clue me in on the last line here on your explanation for number 5. How they're not required to install trees in similar scale. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So based on what the applicant's stating, if they had probably reassessed their property, the assessed value would probably be significantly higher. And really the only trigger that made them be required to install street trees is because of the assessed value of the property. So if a similar applicant was converting a townhouse to an office and didn't meet that criteria, they wouldn't be required to install a street tree. So it's a little bit onerous, given that this is a property that's owned by a nonprofit organization that doesn't regularly need to get their property reassessed. So likely if they did get the property reassessed, they may or may not be required to comply with this regulation. But just on terms of equity, it doesn't seem the most equitable when similar applicants can be doing the same work and not having to plant street trees as well.
And why does it apply to the property they're purchasing, the building that they're converting, as well as their existing building? Why wouldn't it just apply to the lot that they're purchasing?
Because the applicant consolidated the lots into one.
Oh, okay.
So the section of the code related to the planting of street trees doesn't clarify that it only applies to the portion of the property that is being renovated. It's to the entirety of the property as well. I mean, which also kind of increases the burden on the applicant too, that they're only making improvements on a small portion of the property, and even that portion of the property, they probably would not even be able to install a portion of a street tree in front of the former 180 Sheridan Avenue as well. So.
Okay. All right. I forgot that they combined. Okay.
Further questions? Okay, we will see this at the next planning board meeting on the 27th, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I mean,
look-see.
Oh, I'm sorry. And I would, kind of advocate to the board if we're able to get all department approvals, before the meeting. This might be something that's worth considering for the consent agenda. Since it's a pretty straightforward and there's, minimal impact, on the neighborhood and really in terms of, the scale of the project. But I would leave that to the board if they want to consider that or not.
Okay, well, we'll see how much gets in at the end of next week. Okay, we're going to move on to the next proposal, which is again on our workshop meeting at 76 Second Avenue. This is a major project that we have seen a number of times, and it's on here because the proposal has changed a little bit and has responded to a number of questions that and items that were required that the planning staff had sent to the applicants. So you want to go through this?
Yeah.
Zach?
This is going to be really just a few updates. So just as a reminder, I sent a comment letter out to the applicants on the 6th, and they sent a response this afternoon. I haven't been able to look at the response, but we'll be going over their responses to those comments, and they provided some additional materials. And they're looking to submit even more additional materials next Tuesday, so you should be seeing those next week being posted. The applicant's still waiting for responses from the Water Department and the Division of Traffic Engineering. We've been trying to reach out to them to get their comments. Some of the staff members from the Division of Traffic Engineering are out on personal leave, so I'm not sure when we'll be able to receive those. But I can update you all when we hear their responses. And in case anyone did not see this, yesterday the bishop for Elijah Missionary Church, which is immediately adjacent to the project site, sent a letter stating his concerns related to the proximity of the proposed structures and the structural integrity of the church. And on previous site plan sheets, the applicant had included portions of the building and the solar canopies that extended into the church's property. And the bishop wanted to state that they're not providing easements, access, or they're not going to sign on to a lot modification for the project to accommodate the footprint of the building or the air rights for the solar canopy. I, again, have not been able to look at the updated project materials that the applicant sent, so I believe that they're probably going to be addressing components of the bishop's letter going forward. And then just kind of as a reminder, the meeting on the 27th is the first noticed opportunity for members of the public to be able to comment on the project. So I anticipate we'll be hearing a lot more from the public. And this is really an opportunity for them to become familiar with the project. The applicant also asked me to relay the request that if there's any specific topics or items that you want them to focus the presentation on, to feel free and share them now, so I can relay that to them so that the meeting is as tailored and as useful as possible.
Just to clarify, the last bullet there, you're specifically talking about the major development plan review, I'm assuming, because the public has seen this and they have had an opportunity to speak, but I imagine that was on the recommendation by the planning board concerning zoning changes. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is the first noticed opportunity where we send postcards out to property owners within 250 feet for major development plan review. And if members of the public also have comments, on the demolition reviews as well. This is their first time, specific to those applications to be able to discuss them. When it was the zoning map amendment, it was a little bit more big picture at that point. So I think now as the project's starting to progress and be refined based on comments, I think it's a good opportunity for members of the public to comment while there's still time so that the applicant's able to address anything as early on in the process as possible.
Zach, was there any, I know that if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think some of the neighbors' complaints were concerning, increased traffic and, increased amount of traffic, and then, question where parking was, et cetera. So was there anything done on that front?
Yeah, so as part of the seeker for the project, as well as the zoning map amendment, the applicant did a traffic report and as well as a traffic demand management plan where they look to alternative forms of transportation, whether that be public transportation or bicycles or pedestrian infrastructure, to be able to fill in the gaps for them not being able to provide the complete amount of parking. So they submitted that, I believe, in June. We made some initial comments for that when the seeker process was going on for the entirety of the project, not only the zoning map amendment, but these applications as well. So our division of traffic engineering is looking at that report right now, and they'll be able to make any additional comments to make sure that the report's looking at everything it needs to regarding traffic.
I'm assuming that the letter that was sent by Bishop Comithier and also the letter that was sent by the applicants are in the Dropbox.
Yep.
Okay. I would ask the board to make sure you review that because that could provide the basis for any questions or comments you have for the future. And any updated drawings will be in there as well.
So they, with the email today, they submitted an updated site plan sheet showing the lot coverage for the site, but I think there are going to be more updates to site plan sheets with the submission on Tuesday. So I think that's when we'll get to see more of those updates.
Yeah.
So I'll.
Yeah, I would just ask the applicants to make sure that any submissions get to the staff so it can be uploaded into the Dropbox a few days before the board meeting. This is a comprehensive and complicated project, and we've been getting some information too close to the planning board meetings to be able to review and digest them and understand them.
Yeah, and I would say that's why we're trying to, have the application appear as many times as possible, just so it is more on a rolling basis. So it's, not dependent on one meeting or one opportunity for the applicant to appear. So that is why we're trying to provide those, additional meetings to get more feedback, but also to make it easier for the applicant to be responding and make meetings so that comments can be addressed that are made by the board and departments and members of the public.
Okay. All righty, shall we move on to the final item on the agenda? This is basically a new application by the Stewart Shops for the proposal for a convenience store and vehicle fueling station at the corner of Colvin Avenue and Washington Avenue. As you know, the board turned this down, but the applicant has come in with a new proposal that I guess the planning staff and the planning commissioner has felt it was significantly changed, that it could be seen as a new proposal.
Yeah, also, as you mentioned, an updated application for a conditional use permit has been submitted by the applicant that's made changes to the site layout, as well as the vehicle fueling pumps and a few other elements of the proposal. So based on this new application, Commissioner Spencer has determined that the modified application was significantly different enough that it is considered a new application. And so in his memo, he walks through the elements of the updated application that led to the determination that it is a new and distinct application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through those elements, and it'll have the images from the previous conditional use permit application, site plan, along with the updated conditional use permit site plan. So one of the bigger changes from the last application to this application is that the building has been rotated so that the majority of the facade is along Washington Avenue as opposed to Colvin Avenue. There were a fair amount of comments that the building wasn't in keeping with the nearby residential neighborhood, and it wasn't really supporting the residential neighbors, and it was focused more on the Colvin Avenue frontage. So the applicant has addressed this by rotating the building. And in part as well, this changes the primary pedestrian entrance along Washington Avenue. Previously, it was more of a secondary entrance architecturally and functionally. So as you can see on the left, this was the facade for the west elevation, serving as the primary entrance, and now it is shifted to that south elevation as well. The number of gas pump islands has been reduced from 4 to 3, as you can see here. The applicant has reduced the size of the project site. They're providing a buffer or offering to provide a buffer of 5 feet. It would do a lot modification with the property owners abutting the project site to provide them an additional 5 feet of buffer space to address some of the comments related to noise, light, and those elements. The applicants changed the design of the building. The previous design of the building was relating it more to the commercial structures along Colvin Avenue, and there were a few residential structures on the south side of Washington Avenue that it was relating to. The new proposed design with the use of gables is trying to relate itself more to the structures on the northern side of Washington Avenue and try and architecturally relate itself a little bit more to a residential character.
Now, let me ask you, there is the main, literally the physically main entrance on Washington Avenue in the middle.
Yes.
Okay. What is the purpose of the two side entrances? A little port, looks like a little porches with the columns.
Yeah, to provide some seating areas for people who maybe want to eat at the site. Some sports, I think as many people know, provide options for seating, sometimes indoors and sometimes outdoors, and they're trying to provide seating outdoors.
And I think, Zach, I think the west elevation, so when you're looking at the south elevation of the new proposal, the covered sort of porch area that then becomes a secondary entrance from the west side where the pumps are located. So
the applicants also removed the connection with 8 Colvin Avenue. There were some concerns raised that people may try and cut through to avoid the light. So the applicants removed this. So there is no cross connection at this point. And then finally, as you can see on the last slide, but as it's shown here, the existing curb cut that did not restrict access for left turns, right turns, has now been modified to include a center island. So it is now only right in, right out.
There's also egress still onto Colvin, right?
Yes, that is stayed the same between both.
Zach, can you explain to me the difference in the buffer? The tree line. I kind of think of directions. Is that west? Heading along Washington Ave between the subject property and the adjoining residentials off that other, adjacent street.
Yeah, exactly right. So this is really taking away a row of trees, but transferring, or the applicant is offering to transfer that land over to the neighboring property owners. And this kind of gives the property owners the opportunity to, landscape how they see fit, and if they want to do an alternative landscaping, that gives them that option, and it gives them even more space, even in between the project site and their properties.
Okay. And the
Is that,
go ahead, Al.
is that the yellow stripe that you're showing? That
Yeah.
they'll turn over?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry
Okay.
about that. So there's 3 properties that front the project site here. So it would be, the lots would be modified, to follow the lot lines of each of those 3 properties. But it is,
Well, it looks like on the other, the original proposal, that area has been landscaped by Stewart's, and now they're turning it over to the other property owners. So they would have to landscape it and pay for it themselves.
yeah, I'm not specifically sure why the applicant chose that method. I think it was, again, trying to respond to the comments from neighbors saying that they did not want to be as close to the project site. So I think it's trying to respond to that by providing them more buffer space in between. I think that's a question that can definitely be brought up, at the public hearing of why that decision was made.
Yeah, I think the rationale was, again, like you stated earlier, to allow those property owners to do as they see fit. I think Stewart's would probably be willing to plant and pay for any of those for the property owners, but it allows that all to be part of the property owner's site rather than the Stewart site, and to maintain it in a way that they see fit. So it's sort of expanding each one of their yards.
And what's the depth of that again?
5 feet.
It's 5 feet.
5 feet. Okay.
The overall lot is the same size as it was before, right?
Just minus that kind of
That
yellow
little
strip right here.
strip. Okay.
And has the planned trees or whatever along that side changed? It looks like they've changed slightly as well, right?
Just a little bit, just on the location of where they are. Now that portion of land is, proposed to be transferred over to the adjacent property owners. But this is compliant in terms of the landscaping standards for that side lot buffer.
Zach, it also looks like they've reduced the parking along that common property area.
Yep.
So
What is the multicolored rectangle just north of the building itself there, just above Stewart, where it says Stewart Shops? Yes.
This is just a planter that they're proposing to
Oh.
install.
Interesting.
Yeah, this is from the landscaping plan. I'm sorry, I should have specified that. But that's why it's a little more colorful than normal.
It makes it easier to understand.
Yeah, it does.
I'd like to know what the rationale is, though, as to how this is not unlike, or how this is unlike the initial plan, other than moving a few things here and there, because again, the purpose of the MUNC district, according to the USDO, is local retail and small scale commercial uses providing services to the neighborhood, and is predominantly non-auto oriented retail. Again, even though they've reduced the gasoline pumps, it's still going to be auto oriented retail. because it's still going to cater, as far as I see, to a commuting public. And it's going to duplicate resources for the neighborhood, if you want to call it that, that are already there right across the street, as well as 4 other gasoline stations less than a mile away in direction north and direction west. So I think Stewart's is going to, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think Stewart's is going to have to convince me as to why this is a neighborhood oriented facility. I could see it'd be more of a neighborhood oriented facility if there was no gasoline tanks there and they just have a convenience store. But again, there's convenience stores within those other gasoline stations in most cases, including the one right across the street. And even though, you know, there is a new elevation that shows it's a little bit more related to the residential side, it still doesn't seem to be, consistent with the existing development there. It's still a major commercial use. So, I mean, I would, when we have the meeting in 2 weeks or so, I would want to bring up, I would want to hear what the applicant has to say about that.
Are there any?
I was going to say,
oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Martin.
No, it's okay. I tend to agree with Al. I think this is a better proposal, but I still don't know that it meets the intent of the of the zoning district that it's in, or the or the comp plan, as far as creating walkable mixed-use neighborhoods.
Well, how do you determine how to derive that or calculate that? One could argue that reducing the number of pumps means it's less being catered toward motorized traffic, and they move the structure where it's facing Washington Avenue. You could argue that it's more designed for foot traffic and more friendly to the neighborhood. So I can see that argument. It's like, what determines, Zach? If I knocked it down to 1 pump, then does it make a difference? How do you determine that?
I mean, I think for all board members, it's really just looking at the elements of the plan and just kind of identifying what you believe is a walkable element, and then I think comparing the list of more walkable elements to maybe the elements that are not as walkable. And determining whether that list of more walkable elements outweighs or does not outweigh the non-walkable elements. So, I think as you were mentioning, the orientation of the building is something good to look at. The number of parking spaces, the percentage of the lot that's being utilized for, maybe a more walkable purpose versus a less walkable purpose. There's a number of ways I think that it can be analyzed, but for each of the board members, I would say start taking a look at the elements of the plan that you feel, really promote walkability, whether it be that orientation of the building, the tables and the street furniture that they're proposing to install, along the street, and see whether that, is meeting that purpose of the district.
But I also think that we should look at, all the planning board members should review again the conditional use requirements, which are items 1 through 7. And I reviewed it as related to this proposal, and I still see that it really violates items 2, 4, and 7 at least. And that was just a cursory review.
And so, I mean, maybe to, Al and all the board members, it might be helpful maybe just to have a more specified discussion on each of the conditional use permit review standards as I go through the staff memo, just so we're maybe able to, identify which standards, the board feels like the applicant has met or has not met, just so it's easier to come to consensus on that during the meeting next week. I'm not sure if the board has any other suggestions or ideas on how to structure the format of the meeting so that we're, allowing everyone to speak and make sure that, all of the ideas and thoughts are being related back to those standards, because at the end of the day, that's what the board is tasked to review and determine for this application.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, though, I think that we also have to keep in context the actual purpose of the MUNC district, and also the conditional use requirements. And to me, the last time around, we turned it down, and as our counsel mentioned, if it doesn't meet one of the 7 criteria, that's sufficient to have it rejected. And unless I'm convinced, I see it's still violating 4 of them, or 3 of them, plus not the intent and purpose of the actual MUNC district.
So, I mean, maybe it would be helpful for all the board members, just to come prepared with, some notes on any particular comments or questions related to each of the relevant review standards, so that, when we're going through those during the meeting, that we can fully answer everyone's questions, and I think Al stated that he has some concerns over, 4 of the review standards, but it might be different, based on each of the board members. So just wanting to make sure that we're identifying, all of your concerns and making sure that we're fully addressing those at the meeting.
Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah.
Hey, Zach, what are the, going back up along Colvin, the next property, how far back do the commercial properties go in relation to this property? Do they go like, does the commercial section like just go halfway, and is that residential behind it, or is it pretty much commercial use all the way back to where this property line proposed is bordered?
Can you see my mouse?
Yeah.
So are you just asking whether this property is commercial or not?
Yeah, and the one right behind it.
Behind it here?
Yeah.
I think this is just a parking lot for this commercial use right now.
Okay, so those are commercial uses.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is one lot that it's adjacent to the north.
An office.
If you look at the zoning map, there's a pretty straight line from Colvin Avenue to the back of the lots along Colvin Avenue. And this is consistent with that line. So it's a pretty straight line coming all the way down in terms of where that MUNC district is.
Okay.
So,
All right. Yeah, now I
so
remember.
the depth of this is consistent with the depth of the other ones.
And then what do they end up in the, that borders that adjacent property, I guess is 4 Colvin. What are those, what are those in the rectangles up there? I can't remember. Is that refuse? Or?
These are gas storage tanks. So they're underground.
Okay.
They're just showing that on the plan, just because there'll probably be, like a metal plate or a covering, for those tanks.
Right.
And the use of the property immediately to the north, I believe, is an office building.
Yeah. Because really from my perspective anyways, the greatest impacts as far as, meaning the, like say, quote unquote, the character like around Washington Avenue is indeed Washington Avenue. And then the impact of the properties what is it, to the west, where the residential, which is adjoining. You still have a couple of parking spaces there. If you created even a larger buffer, which they wouldn't, then the neighbors wouldn't be impacted by sound and by lights and whatnot, and move those up to where over the tanks or something like that, because that's adjoining commercial use properties. It's not going to have such an impact. I think that'd be more effective. And then also, maybe not necessarily right where their proposed structure is, but in the portions closer to the residential along, where the access is on the west Washington Ave, some more shrubberies or whatever kind of disguising so you don't see the actual fuel pumps from there. I think that, for me, would address the concern about the character and neighbor along Washington Ave as well. Just things that popped in my head when I looked at this.
Yeah, I think they're somewhat limited on changing the location of parking, because the parking can't really obstruct the underground gas storage tanks, just because those need to be utilized by large trucks, and those trucks need to be able to easily move within the site. But those comments, the applicant, I think, is attending right now. But these are things to bring up now, so that if the applicant wants to address or modify the application, they can do so prior to the meeting.
You mentioned that, Zach, that they were putting some amenities along the sidewalk. Sounded like tables, benches, that sort of thing. Is that?
Yeah.
I'm thinking up there at the kind of the north end along Colvin, the north part of the site, just before the driveway. Right in there, because that's one of the things that kind of bugs me about this, is that this is supposed to be a main street, and you'll have this great big gap looking out over what's pretty much open asphalt. If there was something that could be done there to better define the street at that point, I could see it tipping in the direction of being more of an urban street wall kind of feel to it.
In terms
Like
of
what
landscaping or street furniture?
Well, whatever it was that they were thinking about street furniture and landscaping. But I don't know exactly, exactly what that is.
Perhaps it could be like a low wall that shields a little bit of the parking that is also in line with the buildings on Colvin Avenue.
Yeah.
That's kind of a typical urban design motif that's used to sort of define that building line.
Yeah. Exactly.
The parking.
And if there were some tables built into it, all the better. It would give it kind of like a little bit of a gathering space kind of feel to it.
Also, I wanted to ask if the applicant will have or already has had a meeting with the community, as we always recommend, before we have the next meeting, so that they can hear from the community directly and have the community give them input. I know that's always recommended, and this is a new plan, supposedly. So I'm wondering if that's going to happen.
I'm not aware that they've had a meeting with the neighborhood for the new conditional use permit application. They met with us and members from the neighborhood association for the previous conditional use permit application. Even a few iterations before the site plan that you see to the left. But I'm not sure if they've been in contact with the neighbors.
Well, again, I know it's usually normal procedure for the planning staff to recommend that effort.
Yep.
Any other questions, comments, concerns about this? Okay. Zach, you wanted to mention something about training?
Yes. So again, just as a reminder for you all, you're all supposed to have 4 training credit hours per year as a member of the planning board. I think a few of you have already met that requirement, but there are a few of you that still need to meet that requirement, and I'll be reaching out to you to do that. The Capital District Regional Planning Commission, which is one of our 2 local metropolitan planning organizations, they've been holding webinars weekly that can provide you these hours. The series itself costs $10. So once that initial fee's been paid, you'll have access to all of the webinars throughout the end of the year. And our very own Amy is going to be one of those speakers on December 23rd, where I think she'll be talking about, is it complicated land use issues?
Controversial land uses.
Okay, thank you.
That's an oxymoron. Come on.
We'll be sure to skip that one.
So there's plenty of opportunities to get those credits. Oh, and I just for everyone's edification, I think Glenisa's joined us. So Glenisa, I'm sorry, I didn't see when you came in. So I didn't know if you wanted to discuss anything in particular and related to the applications or the training requirements.
No, I actually came in about like a minute or 2 ago, so I'm fairly recent. But no, yeah, I think, well, going back to training requirement, I just did a total lawyer thing. I have nothing else to say, but yeah, just, yeah, if you can just give us what those who are offering trainings. I know we did like last year pre-COVID, we had that training day, which was good, but we can't do that this year.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll send the link for that. And so if anyone's interested in participating in that webinar series, you know, feel free to let me know and we can start the process of signing you up. I'm not sure how long it's going to take to get that approved, but I'm hoping relatively soon, especially since it's a relatively low cost for, you know, a large number of webinars. So it's a really good opportunity to either meet your training requirements just for this year or kind of stock up because training credits can roll over into next year as well. So it's a pretty good opportunity. Glenisa, we prior to the conversation on the training requirements, we were just talking about the new conditional use permit application for Stewart's. So I didn't know if you wanted to use this time to ask any questions about the application or just the upcoming meeting on the format of that.
Not right now, but can I ask questions before our next meeting?
Yeah,
in 2
definitely.
weeks? All right, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and for any board member, feel free to email me, or if you want to set up a time to talk prior to the meeting, I'm more than happy to do that.
There will be, for both the 76 project and the new proposal by Stewart's, Glenisa, there'll be a number of materials in the draw. The planning board members to review the Stewart's proposal as related to the purpose of the MUNC district and also the conditional use requirements that are, you know, enumerated in the USDO. So you're going to give a good context. Okay, I hear a proposal for adjournment.
Oh,
You know, while I'm thinking of it, and maybe a question for Amy quick on that. Stewart's. Amy, you still there?
Yes.
Based upon that zoning, you know, and the, you know, the stipulation where it's not trying to be auto, you know, vehicle related, I forget the actual words.
Oriented?
Yeah. If I'm changing my fueling stations from 4 to 3, I mean, clearly there is some thought put into it that is more in line with the zoning. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I guess I would just mention that, vehicle fueling stations are conditionally permitted use in the district. So, that would suggest that the legislative policy in the USDO is that they are permitted in some circumstances within the district. To say that all fueling stations are auto-oriented and thus, they're not permitted would essentially, it would contradict the fact that the USDO makes them a conditional use.
But it does, in fact, make it a conditional use, which is a really critical part. And it says specifically that primary land uses include a variety of predominantly non-destination and non-auto-oriented retail. I think that's really important.
But I think the key
And
word
I don't see how, whether it's one pump or 4 pumps or 6 pumps, that, I mean, unless somebody's going to come up with a can of gasoline, a gasoline can, and put gas in it for their lawnmower, how you can interpret whether it's 1 pump, 4 pumps, or 6 pumps, that it's not automobile oriented.
Now, I would just say that, you just, maybe the board can think about what the description is, which is predominantly non-auto oriented. So it doesn't completely exclude a auto oriented, or looking at a use to see if the use itself is predominantly non-auto oriented. So sort of, like, I think as Roman was saying, how do you sort of look at this and break it down in terms of how much of, maybe walk-in business they get versus, how much is gasoline, which requires a car, and things like that. So I think there are a lot of ways to look at whether it is a predominant use.
But I have a question about that, though. How can you make a difference in those numbers when mainly what generally happens at a gas station is somebody goes and pumps fuel and either goes in to pay for that fuel, or, you know what I mean?
So
Say
you're
it
saying,
again.
Yeah, I mean, to me, then we would have to find out if in similar places where Stewart's selling sandwiches and coffee is going to be more than the amount of money they get from the gross amount of money they get from gasoline pumping.
Yeah, but I don't know if I don't know if they readily have those statistics, or if we're asking for an undue burden on them to obtain that type of statistics. Like, how do you differentiate between somebody walking off the street? And each location is different, because you might not have people walking off the street or what have you. Like, I don't know if that's an undue burden we're asking them to do.
Well, I think also with the MUNC, any particular use has that opportunity for parking for people to drive up and then enter into a building. So the fact that somebody comes in by car doesn't necessarily make it primarily auto oriented use. So I think
one thing
go ahead
that we have here is that it's a brand new type of fueling station as well. It's much larger than they have been in the past. Just look at the one across the street. It's maybe a third the footprint, and the Stewart's footprint is clearly, most of it is parking and fuel, purchasing, probably 80 or 90% of the surface area of the lot. So I can see why you would allow an auto-oriented use, it's even if it's in an area that's supposed to be predominantly non-auto-oriented. But when this thing to me is quite a bit more auto-oriented than a lot of other gas stations might be. There's the famous one in Savannah where it's just like a tiny little spot where you can pull off, and there's one pump right in the middle of downtown in a very lovely residential neighborhood. And that to me is, the other side of the scale. It's a gasoline station, but it's not auto-oriented, oddly enough. Whereas this one is, we've got something very different happening here. I think it's going to take out it's going to remove quite a few other buildings. And I think it's going to make it difficult to really say that we're trying to make that a neighborhood Main Street.
Well, one argument can be made is, that, stewards like other C-stores with gas sales, they know what their income is inside versus outside and the relationship between the two and how that works. And yet you also have some, Stewards has several C-stores that do not have gas sales. So they have adequate parking, whatever they have determined that to be for those spots as well. So you've got some kind of basis. I mean, they could always come back and say, well, yes, I've got this space in, Del Mar with no gas sales, and here I need, parking spaces of 15 to accommodate that, and that's what we have on this site, more or less, or whatever. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a fine line, and just like Chris said, the wording in the USDO, the word, the choice of the word predominantly, is something to be considered. So I don't know. Just from looking at it, I'm curious. I was just kind of curious why. Clearly, the applicant decided that dropping it from 4 to 3 would make a difference, and I'm just curious what that thought process was and how it was calculated or derived. You know what I mean? And if that indeed makes a huge difference, given the zoning.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
It's because I would guess it's because they had to try to reorient the building, and so it's a land development decision. I don't think it has to do with.
It narrows the pump
reducing
island a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of how they could fit everything into that space in the size that they want.
I think, as all of you have been mentioning, it's kind of a fine balance of, both the form of the building as well as the usage of the site, and trying to try and balance all those characteristics when determining it, whether it's, auto-oriented or not, and if it maybe is more of an auto-centric use, are there elements of the architecture or the landscaping that are compensating for that to make it more in line with the purpose of the mixed-use neighborhood center zoning district as well. So I think there's lots of ways to look at it. But again, if people have questions up until the meeting, feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to walk through the application or answer any of your questions. I think these are all good topics of conversation for the meeting on the 27th.
Okay. All righty. Thank you so much for everything. And again, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Please shut off your computer.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Good night.
Have a good night.